Hi everyone, it's Rax. A lot of people pointed to a video on GameSpot about Diablo 4 recently, about Season 2, where Chris Wilson and Rod Ferguson are going to chat about it. I'd like to listen in here and give you my thoughts on it. Never done a reaction video ever in the 1,000 videos I've made on my YouTube, but this one I thought might be a good one to give you my insights on. So let's listen to what they have to say.
I'm Chris Wilson, production director over the live service for Diablo 4.
And I'm Rod Ferguson, general manager of all things Diablo.
So Season 2 is going to be launching on October 17th, and it's called the Season of Blood. We're really excited because this is going to be a new vampire threat is essentially invading Sanctuary. And so there's going to be a new quest line, so the player will be partnering with the new character named Eris, who's being voiced by Gemma Chan. So we're super excited to have her join our really, great ensemble of voice talent. And she thinks she's going to be a great fit for the game. And on top of that, the character is going to gain access to new vampiric powers that you'll be able to use across all of the different classes to take out the new vampire threat.
See how these powers turn out.
So we'll have new legendary items and weapons, new uniques, and it's really going to provide a whole new way to kind of like.
So they're going to give us new items just like they did in Season 1. That's good. I mean, that's one of the many things that we need. Legendaries and uniques.
Progress with your character and a new power fantasy.
Yeah, and then that's sort of the theme and story side of it. And then obviously with each season, as part of a live service, we want to do quality of life and make changes to the game sort of in the end game as well. And so one example of that is in Season 2, we're introducing 5 new additional bosses. Because we look at, what is the progress you make from level of, say, 50 to 100. And we wanted to have more milestones along the way where you can be like, oh, I can test my build
against a big problem with Diablo 4 currently.
And we also know there's a huge desire for our uniques and the uber uniques because they have a very low drop rate and sometimes they really solidify your build. And so now with these 5 new bosses, you can actually target uniques and you can go and have a much higher drop rate on an uber unique than you would in the open world.
The uber
Those 5
bosses
don't
exist.
Obviously, it's interesting because the way people approach this kind of stuff now is they're very invested. So like at the same time as being excited, there's a level of cynicism towards everything that is coming out. So I saw the 5 bosses, excitement, and then immediately people were like, are they just going to be reskins of a boss that we know 5 times? So can you talk about like what those 5 bosses will actually entail?
It's a mixture of sort of like new and sort of, one of the things we heard a lot from players was like, I don't think we've ever even talked much about it, where the bosses are coming from, but there's a notion of like, I play these campaign bosses and I didn't necessarily get to fight them ever again unless I'm playing the campaign. So that's part of the inspiration. So there's going to be definitely like ways we can leverage content we've had, but also new content as well. And so the fact that we're doing it in the seasonal and the eternal is going to be really exciting. And again, that idea of like, we've heard a lot of feedback around the uber unique. So, and what's really interesting is that actually it's a boss ladder. So it's not like in Diablo 2 where you would just go farm a boss over and over and over and over again. There's actually sort of prerequisites to be able to summon a boss that you'll have to go through the bosses to get there. And so it actually has its own gameplay involved in even having a boss appear.
Okay, so I'm not sure that I feel the same way as it sounds like the question was asked. They were saying that reskins of an old boss essentially wouldn't cut it, is what I took from that. I agree with Rod here. I think the campaign in general was probably the most successful thing that Diablo 4 did. And the Diablo 4 team has done well with taking a Lilith fight, which was pretty easy, and making Uber Lilith, which was significantly harder, and it was definitely different. Whether people like the one-shot mechanics or not is another story. But just because they've shown that just because you fought Lilith in the campaign does not mean it's going to be exactly the same. Sounded like they're going to take some of those campaign bosses and they're going to have some new ones. I think that's a perfectly acceptable combination for this implementation. So now if we get bosses like Tomb Lord, if we get like an Uber Tomb Lord that we've killed 17,000 times in Nightmare Dungeons, that's when we're going to have a problem.
Happens when something goes out into the world? When do you start to pick up on the general sentiment from the audience? What is it? Data points? Is it social media? How do you know what the sentiment is?
So with live service development, we're always paying attention to the community. So we're looking at all sources of feedback. We solicit surveys to some of our players, so we use that as one kind of funnel for information. We look at telemetry and data that's like coming back from like, the back end. So we kind of see like where there are pain points or friction from just looking at data. But then also we're paying attention to, forums. When we do a blog post or release patch notes, we're trying to look at like, what is the response? What are things that are coming back from the community? And we use that to kind of help inform some of the, decision points for the future. And so what's great with the live service is like between seasons, patches, hot fixes, there's numerous kind of vehicles for us to kind of like inject change and evolve the game for the future. And it's always in pursuit of making the best possible experience for the players.
It's one of the big challenges is really around the idea of the vocal minority. Like sometimes a very small group can be very loud, and that's why we use things like surveys. Like, because you're always managing sort of the qualitative information you get, where people's just opinions, and then the quantitative information you have, which is the actual data that shows what's actually happening. And it's in a game where it's sort of built on a power fantasy. Like, everybody loves candy, right? And so but you can't have candy all the time. And so that's one of the hard parts about managing, is that sometimes there's a little bit of medicine and you need some sugar to go with it, right? And so as we're looking at our feedback and we're looking at what we need to do to balance the world, because we want every build to be playable and we want every build to be viable. And so sometimes you have to sort of manage that across all the different classes and all the different builds. And sometimes you need a little medicine. And I think one of the things as we look at season 1, we want to really show that we're being responsive and reactive and being agile, but we sort of got 2/3 of the way there, and we had a lot of the medicine, but we didn't have the sugar yet. And so, but to be able to act quickly, we sort of said, well, that's good. We've got the fix, but when we didn't bring and here's the other fun part that makes that balance work. And so I think that's part of the criticism of season 1, is that we did the medicine, didn't quite yet do the sugar, and then we've been doing the sugar as we go now. And there's something our game director talked about in one of the live streams, is that moving forward, anytime we have to do any sort of significant balance, we'll always have that other side of it, because it's really about, we're making the game for player joy. We're making the game the best game we can for players. And so, but sometimes they have to have a salad. They can't have ice cream for dinner every night, and so you just have to kind of balance your messaging, manage expectations, communicate more openly. And I think we're doing that now as we go into season 2.
Okay, so there's a lot of things there. So first of all, when they solicited information, they didn't mention content creators. Feels bad, man. So they said that they solicit, they use surveys, not really sold on surveys, and they use data like the telemetry. Telemetry can tell you a lot. And they are trying to avoid like the vocal minorities. Now, vocal minorities can certainly be a huge problem. They can be, because they can just complain about something infinitely when it's not actually a pain point for the general audience. I agree with that. But a lot of times the vocal minorities are very specialized in something. So for example, if all the sorcerers are banding together and they're saying fire is unplayable, and all you hear is the fire sorcerers complaining, but you don't hear complaining from anybody else, well, that data is actually that feedback is extremely valuable. And some people would probably, in my opinion, at least for some, incorrectly label content creators as a vocal minority, because it is any good content creator's job, at least who stick with a game for any length of time, to also consider the opinions of their communities and have a good insight in what the community in general is feeling, and trying to be like a champion for all of those things. So versus, here's a survey on 1 to 5, how much did you like leveling? Like, I don't know how their surveys are conducted. I don't think I've ever taken a survey for Diablo 4 ever, but to me, that feedback is extremely bland, and I'm not sure how you can glean much from that. The whole medicine and ice cream thing analogy, that analogy is literally true. And they're saying the problem is that the complaint for season 1 is that there was too much medicine and no sugar. Meaning that, I'm guessing they mean that they fixed bugs and they nerfed things, but they didn't do any buffs with it. That was certainly part of the problem. The bug fixes I'm good with all the time, but when you just nerf a ton of builds, it just is a feel bad moment and you gave us nothing else. And I don't think that even that particular thing is even close to the source of the dissatisfaction with Diablo 4. Like that's not really the problem with Diablo 4. Problem is what he alluded to earlier, the 50 to 100 experience, the stuff after the campaign. People feel like they've got nothing to do. People are having troubles building their characters because they can't target farm the uniques in any way. You can't find the Tempest Roar. You can't find the raiment. You can't find your resource powers, and you have to sort through a million items, and it's not fun. So I think there's a lot of other factors that are playing into this. It's not just that that's making the game suffer currently.
You mentioned it earlier, but how do you account for the vocal minority in a way that feels like you're speaking to them, but also not balancing that with the realistic kind of achievements that you can do? Because it's obviously like Diablo 4 comes out, everyone's super positive, and everyone is like really up on it, and the vast majority of people are enjoying it. But then the conversation quickly turns into like, this is missing, that is missing. But that conversation is very much defined and pushed by a group of people that are at level 100 or 80, and they're the only people that are like really vocal. Right. So it can seem like when people are looking at it, oh, this is a really pervasive issue, and it's actually just a small group of people.
So I'm not even going to wait for the response here. The question here frightens me, because was any part of that accurate? So if I'm recalling the question correctly, it's only level 180 plus people are complaining about the game. The large majority of players are very satisfied with Diablo 4. And how do you account for these people that are making a lot of noise? This, I don't even know if I understand, if I agree with any of the things that are kind of loaded into this question. I think I have had tons of people, and anybody watching my video, my reaction, you can tell me if I'm wrong. There's tons of people that don't even make it to 80 who are dissatisfied with Diablo 4. Rod literally just said, kind of alluded to a few moments ago, that people start to feel bored, and we don't have any milestones really starting past 50, which is a much more accurate statement. And now the 1 to 50 blast is very quick now that they made some changes. So it's very, very quick that once you're out of the campaign, you're not doing a whole lot. So it's actually just a small group of people feeling this way. I think if this is how Blizzard is approaching it, it's a question being asked them. They're kind of setting them up for failure here. That I do not think that is the sentiment going around. That is not how it feels whatsoever.
How do you like approach that, and is there anything that you do to try and tell your own team, like, hey, I know it looks like this, but we have to think about everyone, and how do you message that out as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the quantitative data really helps there, so you can actually see what's happening with the game, and you can go like, oh, this might be an issue for people who are level 100, and this is the percentage of people who've actually gotten there so far, and we can sort of look at how big of an issue that actually is. But I mean, I don't want to say vocal minority to be dismissive, because sometimes that vocal minority are also your influencers and the people who are, the tastemakers, who will be like, hey, this is how we feel about it, and you want to take that in as well. And that's why it's always is a balance between knowing what are we hearing and what are we seeing in the game and what are we feeling when we play. And I think that notion of like, hey, one of the things we were excited about with D4 is that as a mainline game, no other Diablo game actually had any end game at all. Like when the campaign rolled credits, you were done. And so we were really happy with D4 to have Helltide and Nightmare Dungeons and the Tree of Whispers and PvP. And so we felt like this was a great starting place. And so when we talked, even if you go back to our interviews pre-launch, we would talk about this is the beginning and not the ending of Diablo. This is a foundation we're building upon. And you're seeing that, like in season 2 with these 5 additional bosses, in season 3 we're going to be bringing in leaderboards. Like this is an evolution of a game over time. And so the notion that you can kind of grind your way to 100 and go like, what the heck, where's everything I was expecting? Like all that stuff is being layered in over time as we go, and we're continuing to make the game better and better. So it really is just sort of like, definitely take in what you hear, but also trust but verify. Go and see what the data is telling you as well.
So I mean, I give Rod credit there. That was a pretty good answer to a loaded question. He literally said that the vocal minority, you shouldn't just dismiss them, and you should correlate it with the data to make decisions. That was very very smart answer by him there. So I can see both sides. Like I could throw Blizzard a bone here because the statement that he made is absolutely true. There's essentially no end game in Diablo 2. There is no end game in Diablo 3. In Diablo 2, you just magic find and go kill the Ubers or whatever. It's very simple. And in Diablo 3, you just do greater ifs all the time. There's literally nothing else. Bounties are completely worthless. You just do greater ifs all the time. I could understand why they would think on launch that with PvP, Helltide, Tree of Whispers, Uber Lilith, Nightmare Dungeon pushing, that sounds like a lot more of an endgame than it is in the other Diablo games. It is true. It is more of an endgame than we have. Missing the leaderboards and sprinkling it in over time is hurting the community, and it's really making people mad. And we got to understand that side too. It just doesn't work this day and age when Last Epoch has a brilliant loot filter and an amazing crafting system, and you're going to be judged against Path of Exile that has all of this stuff already figured out already, even though it's a 10-year-old game. And Diablo 3, even though the team has had great seasons, the actual game itself has not evolved really in any way. You're going to be judged against that, and when you compare it against that, it's not good enough. And that's why people get upset. So yes, they are fixing it, and I could see why that having more of an end game than before felt like it was going to be a pretty good starting point, but that's not how it seems to be turning out.
In addition to that, I think the other important piece of this is transparency, right? So we're really trying to create and be open with our community about setting expectations. Like, here's what we're trying to do in the near future, releasing patch notes early, really just having live streams, the campfire chats, letting our audience know, like, here's what we're trying to do in the short term. Here are things we want to even do in the medium term, like he mentioned leaderboards for season 3. Like, we're trying to just be more open about that information versus holding everything to the vest.
They have improved there. Their communication with the community has certainly improved over the years. That's true.
And Joe in our last, he talked about philosophy. Like, here's why we're doing certain things. Because I think it's one thing to say what you're doing, another thing to say why you're doing it. And so I think helping people understand, like, oh, this is our goal, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and just give some background to why these decisions are being made.
You guys have been quite candid with, the patch came out and it nerfed some stuff, and you're like, okay, we did it wrong, we won't do that again. And then you talked about all the vehicles you have to kind of approach it. How do you feel about the expectation that creates? Because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you're like, oh, we can react, but then the expectation from the audience is when they demand something, they need it immediately, and they're like, why do you put it? How do you guys as developers feel about that, and how do you try and manage those expectations?
It is a balancing act, depending on what it is we're trying to address. I mean, it can obviously take development time to get it right? You don't want to be too hasty to just rush, change. You may end up imbalancing the game in a different way that you maybe didn't foresee. So you have to take your time to really think through, okay, how do we want to address the problem that's been flagged? Look at it in terms of priority as well. There's oftentimes competing priorities. So it's making sure you're targeting the thing that's going to have the biggest impact for the player first and foremost, and then finding the right time to release those things. And so it's just really a balancing act that our leadership and our designers have to really kind of work through for each issue as it comes through.
Yeah, it's also complexity of the development process. When we have essentially 3 teams working on the seasonal side. We have our odd teams, so doing season 1, then season 3, then season 5. We have our even teams doing season 2, season 4, and then we have another team that's focused on what's going on in the live game. And so on top of those 3 teams, the odds and evens are leapfrogging each other. We've got our live team, and then we actually have an expansion team working as well. And so when we hear a piece of feedback, there's always a conversation. If we agree with it, then it's is this a short term? Hey, we can do that as a hot fix overnight. Is this more of a patch that has to come in 2 weeks? Or actually it's something we're going to address next season because of the way that, we're a lot of the ways, that's part of the thing. When we put out season 1 was finished when we released. And so there was no real player feedback yet, other than sort of the beta feedback. But after launch, season 1 was kind of done. And so that's why we use that preseason time to tweak as much as we could, and why we, removed the need for the altars of Lilith and that kind of thing. So it's just that notion that the trains are always running, right? The trains are always leaving the station, and what can get on which train is always part of the balancing act of like, oh yeah, we agree with that feedback. Now which train can we actually make it on? And are we willing to delay other things to make that happen? Because I think sometimes people just feel like it's always additive. And really it's kind of like there's only so much scope that a team can do. And so to say like, oh, this new idea wants to come in, well then that means usually another idea needs to get postponed. And so when we're talking about the prioritization, it's like, oh, we want to do this. Are we willing to slow down this other thing? You know, and so that's definitely one of the things, the give and takes you have to do when you're balancing.
All right, so there's really a lot to unpack there. So the first thing that I want to talk about is expectations and managing expectations. I got to be honest with you. I'm not sure what that phrase really means. Managing expectations. The expectation of pretty much everybody for Blizzard, supposed to be game producer, and for Diablo 4, one of the most beloved and well-known ARPG franchises, the bar is always going to be very, very high. So any idea of managing expectations and trying to change where the bar is, I don't think that's ever going to happen. The bar is always going to be set high. And it is true, it's probably higher for this game and this company than some of the other ones, although the other ones usually have a pretty high bar as well. But I think trying to manage expectations and trying to bring that bar lower, I don't think that's a thing. I just don't think that that happens. Another thing that they said is they have an odd season team, an even season team, and an expansion team. And they probably have a bunch of other teams. This reminds me, I spent a decade in a Fortune 100 company. In a corporation, I went through all the different trainings and corporate mumbo jumbo over and over and over in the lean and the Six Sigma and everything and trying to be more efficient and yada, yada, yada. That setup, like I don't know exactly how their internal affairs work. I'm not a corporate strategist, but that sounds like exactly what you don't want to do. And that sounds exactly the reason why season 1 sounds exactly like season 2. Season 1, you hunt the malignant, or essentially, I don't know, zombies, and you get their powers. Season 2, you hunt vampires, and you get their powers. I'm sure that they communicate, but currently it feels like exactly the same thing. And whatever I have learned in the corporate world is silos are bad. When you have these different teams doing different things and you're just relying on the communication between them to work, usually is not the way to do it. Usually the way is to have your teams more integrated and actually working together and communicating all the time together. Maybe they have processes to do that, but this would explain very much why season 1 sounds like season 2. And the final thing that they said about season 1 being built before they even had the game going live or anything like that, and they didn't have a chance to get any of the feedback before the beta, that I put 100% on Blizzard. You can solicit the feedback of people to sign an NDA whenever you want. For example, let's say they're already working on seasons 1 through 4, and they just got the first idea for season 5. You can have people sign an NDA right now, call them into a meeting and say, here's what we're thinking for season 5. What do you think? You can bring them in very, very early and have them tested out way a million times earlier that has been happening with Diablo 4. It has happened with some of the other games. So it certainly works. Huge mistakes have been caught in the seasons. For example, in Diablo 3, whenever we've had times to discuss it far, far before it ever hit a PTR. So if you ever want the feedback, it doesn't even have to be me. There's tons of people, or if you have them sign an NDA, they'll give you their opinion very early on it. So, I mean, they had the opportunity to get the feedback whenever they want.
I don't want to say misunderstanding, but a lot of the kind of discussion is also attributed to things like the battle pass system and the season model as well. And some people have said it doesn't feel like it works in Diablo. And, you know, we've had other people make games similarly, like the Path of Exile, keep looking at it and being like, we're learning a lot from the viability of something like a battle pass model, how often do you kind of like reassess that, and do you think it does still work in this day and age? Especially because it's like a lot of cosmetic stuff and you don't want to upset the balance, and when it is like you can't put a lot of meaningfully changing content in there, is it even worth doing? How do you
I'm not sure I understand this. I'm not sure I understand the question here. I have not heard really from the community at all that the battle pass is even close to the biggest problem in Diablo 4. The battle pass, I just don't even pay attention to it. It costs some money and you get some cosmetics if you would like to get the cosmetics. And otherwise it does nothing. And then you can get the little the seasonal boost to put in, which is fine. You level up and you put them in and it doesn't cost any money. I've never heard anybody really complain about the battle pass. As long as it doesn't sell power, I don't think people really care about it. I don't think I've ever heard anybody complaining about it. So yeah, this is not one of the 5 questions I would have asked them, or not even close. I very curious to hear their response here, because out of all the backlash that I've heard about a million different things in Diablo 4, the battle pass hasn't really been a huge pain point.
approach like looking at that kind of system?
I think that's what we're learning now. Like, that's one of the things is like we're having lots of conversation about the first time we've done something, and so in times we'll come together and we'll go like, hey, everybody, this is one data point, and we're looking at season 1 and like, what's the battle pass doing? What's the shop doing? What is the seasonal reset doing? How do we feel about it? And it's like, at the end of the day, it's one data point. And so I'm really excited for season 2 on October 17th, because that's now we'll have 2 data points to go like, okay, how many people are playing? How many people are engaging with Battle Pass and Shop? How's it all working? And so I think this is all learning for us. Like, I know people tend to think like, oh, you had 10 years with Diablo 3, you must know everything. And the answer is very different games, very different team. And so and obviously the industry's changed in the last 10 years. So for us, this is a lot of learning for us. So we're going to, make some mistakes as we're trying to make the game better and better.
Yeah. Do you think there's kind of like a different expectation on a team like the Diablo team, or even a developer?
One thing he said there that I think is fair is a lot of people think Blizzard has everything figured out. No, it's obvious that they don't. But I also think that's pretty unreasonable. Have them think that they have it all figured out. But Rax, I should have made Diablo 4 way better than it actually is. I know that. I'm speaking about in a vacuum here. People do expect them to know literally everything and have everything perfect. That is the unreasonable part about the expectation. That's what I'm talking about specifically. I agree with him there. I also agree with him that the industry has changed. If you would have launched Diablo 4 like this a long time ago, maybe you'd have a different reaction. But with how much the ARPG genre has evolved with Path of Exile, from the mistakes that we have from Diablo 3, with how good Last Epoch is looking on launch, people are the bar is very high. So the expectations probably have never been higher.
Developer like Blizzard, yeah, because obviously you're seen as one of the biggest developers in the world, but the thing that you're introducing is still quite new to you. There's the expectation, well, this is Blizzard, they shouldn't be allowed to stumble or able to stumble. They should know this stuff. Like, how do you kind of like approach that sentiment, knowing that there's no like pushing back against it?
I think it's just like we're all kind of just working our way through it. It's like sure, we have a lot of benefits of being part of Blizzard, and we had a lot of learnings, and we were able to talk to each other and understand what's going on in WoW and what's going on in Overwatch, and we can talk to each other. But at the end of the day, this team is like doing a live service like this is new for this team. And even we have some D3 veterans and things, but a lot of our team, like, there's a good part of our team where Diablo 4, we were at the launch party where I was like, how many people, this is your first game ever? And like a bunch of hands go up and you're like, this is the very first game they've ever shipped is Diablo 4. And so there's definitely like the combination of experience and the ability to access Blizzard, but like we're still going to learn as we go. And so, yeah, I think I get the, hey, you're Blizzard, you should never make a mistake. But at the same time, like, again, the industry is always changing, the games are always changing, the players are always changing. So it's just going to be learning as we go. And that's why what I love about a live service is we can evolve over time. It's not a fixed state. And so that with each season, and we're going to support the game for years to come, is that we can evolve and learn as we go.
I think what's fascinating.
So there is certainly there's a scenario where that's not bad news. A lot of times when you're trying to innovate all the time, companies will go out and they'll go to colleges and they'll look for the fresh graduates that have 4.0s, and they're geniuses, and they have all these ideas, and they're young and they're hungry, and companies hire them and have them, innovate and come up with these crazy new things. So it's not inherently bad, like by default, to have a bunch of new people on the game. But the way that that was phrased sounds maybe it doesn't inspire warm, fuzzy feelings. You're at the banquet, you're about to release Diablo 4. How many people never made a video game before? Me, oh, look at all those hands. That could explain some of it. And I'm not really sure when I think about it. The first thing that I thought about when he said that was, has Diablo 4 really innovated anywhere? Where does the innovation come from? And I'm not sure that I'm seeing it. Like, where is the innovation? I don't really know where it is. So, that could explain part of it. And yes, there's no better teacher than experience for yourself. There's nothing better. There's nothing that school can prepare you for. There's nothing that looking at other competitors can prepare you for other than actually doing it yourself. This is true for pretty much any facet of life. But there are so many people making ARPGs and MMOs and trying all these different things, probably just paying very, very close attention to what all of them are doing, concatenating that data and making a plan off of it, certainly has to give you a pretty good vision for your team, right? So it really, I don't think the being a fresh team is completely to blame here.
Thing about that is because we have a studio like you guys where we very much are like figuring it out as you go along to a degree, and it's kind of like the expectation is, why are you doing this? You should have the perfect product each time, and it's not thought of as great. But then on the flip side, you have a thing like Larian, which just put out one of the best RPGs in a long time, but it was developed over 3 years of iterating, very publicly forward-facing, and people are celebrating that right now. It must be kind of wild to be in an industry where you can have two contradicting kind of like narratives on the same thing going, and like, how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis as developers?
They all have that. I mean, I'm just really happy that this feels like the year of the RPG, when you look at Starfield and Final Fantasy and Hogwarts, and all the stuff that's going on. So I'm just excited to be part of that. And I think they each have their own place when you think about like the turn-based versus the hack and slash.
I feel like that question was just a dagger straight to their hearts.
Versus,
Tears of the
third
Kingdom
person
2, by the
versus
way, Zelda.
isometric. Like, I think it's really cool that the RPGs can have such a diversity, and so I don't know. I just think it's great that RPGs is really coming to the top this year.
So, interesting talk here at Gamescom. Thanks for GameSpot for doing the interview here. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I always remember is it's hard to be put on the spot. Yes, they're the leaders of Diablo. It's hard to be put on the spot. It's hard to tackle tough questions. Imagine yourself in that position. It's not ideal. Yeah, some of the things that they talked about, I agree with, and we can cut them some slack. We shouldn't hold them to being perfect. We shouldn't have them have everything figured out. They do need the resources to implement the stuff post-launch, and some patience is required there. Some of the things that were talked about in this interview, I think, though, did not really hit on exactly what the problems are. I'm very happy that Rod explicitly called out that the vocal minority that they're calling it shouldn't be dismissed, because a lot of times the vocal minority collaborates with a big part of the community before organizing their thoughts. Not everybody. Some people just go on there just to bitch, but there's usually a little bit of a method to the madness there, and I think it's more important than they were leading on. And yeah, some of the things about how the teams are structured and how everybody is so new, and how they kept playing on this is a new team's experience. I think that could potentially be improved. Again, I'm not a corporate expert here, but from the training that I have had in the decade that I did work for a corporation, they pretty much endlessly drove into our heads that that's not how you do things. So maybe they have a better method than that. But I hope that they're learning. I hope that the game continues to improve. But yeah, this is an interesting interview, and I guess we'll see how the community is feeling after season 2, because I think it's gonna tell us a lot, to be honest. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. This is my first reaction video ever. What did you think? Do you think I should do more of these? In general, I'm not a reaction Andy. I usually just make my own content and blast, but I thought people were pointing to this video, and I thought this one would be like very, very relevant. So it made a lot of sense. If you'd like me to give my insights on more of these, I can. Otherwise, I'll just stop forever. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.